The applause made me sick. There I was, sitting 3 seats from the coffee machine in TechFlow Dynamics' main conference room, watching Preston Caldwell announce quarterly results like he was crowning royalty instead of promoting some 27-year-old who needed help spelling authentication in emails. "Let's give Austin Mitchell a round of applause," Preston said, grinning like a proud father at his kid's Little League game. He closed the MedTech Solutions deal and exceeded all KPIs this quarter. "Outstanding leadership, son." Everyone clapped like they hadn't watched Austin panic for 2 straight weeks, asking what SSL certificates were and why they mattered. Meanwhile, I built the entire security architecture for that deal, spent 4 months designing the encryption protocols, trained 3 junior developers on implementation, stayed up until 2 a.m. for 6 nights running when their authentication system kept failing penetration tests. Austin once pushed live code to production that exposed client data for 6 hours. Somehow still walked away with a $15,000 bonus and promotion to senior product lead. Me? I got a $25 Bass Pro Shops gift card and Preston's signature line. "We'll circle back on your promotion next quarter, Nate." Name's Nathan Sullivan, by the way. 52 years old, been grinding at TechFlow for 15 years. Used to be a Navy cryptographer before this corporate circus took over my life. Some days I think I should have stayed in the service where competence actually mattered. "You're such a rock, Nate," Preston told me after the all-hands call, leaning back in his chair like he was bestowing wisdom. "Everyone depends on you. I know that promotion's overdue, but budget constraints. You understand, right?" I nodded and smiled. Same professional mask I'd been wearing for 1.5 decades. Because here's what I learned. Show any frustration and they pile more work on your desk, calling it leadership development opportunities. This was the 4th time in 3 years that budget constraints magically only applied to me. Never applied to Austin and his crew who spent half their workday debating fantasy football trades and which cryptocurrency was about to explode. TechFlow Dynamics wasn't some startup. We're an 800-employee defense contractor with $200 million annual revenue. Preston's budget constraints line was pure garbage, and we both knew it. That night, I shut my work laptop like I was closing a coffin lid and fired up my personal machine. The one TechFlow's IT department had never touched: my home office, my rules, my time. I wasn't going to vent to my ex-wife, wasn't going to update LinkedIn with passive-aggressive quotes about workplace leadership. I was going to build something they couldn't steal, couldn't claim, couldn't touch. My personal GitHub repository lit up the screen like a beacon. The cybersecurity automation platform I'd been quietly developing for 10 months straight. Clean architecture, military-grade encryption, bulletproof security protocols, every single line of code written on my own time, in my garage workshop, using equipment I bought with my own money. I called it Phoenix, because sometimes you have to burn down the old life to rise from the ashes. Look, if you've ever been passed over for promotion by someone young enough to be your kid, or watched incompetent people get credit for work you actually did, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps bring stories like this to people who need to hear them. Phoenix started as therapy after TechFlow's 3rd restructuring in 2 years. Management kept bringing in fresh perspectives to modernize our cybersecurity approach. Fresh perspectives turned out to be Preston's golf buddies and their college-age relatives who needed entry-level positions. The platform tracked security vulnerabilities across enterprise networks in real-time, automated threat responses based on machine learning algorithms, and managed compliance reporting for multiple regulatory frameworks simultaneously. Basically, Phoenix did what our entire 12-person cybersecurity team struggled to accomplish manually every quarter. I'd actually pitched something similar to executive leadership 2 years back. They said it wasn't a strategic priority, too complex for our current infrastructure. Great idea, Nate, but not the right time. Then I watched them hire Cyberdyne Consulting for $2.8 million to build something half as functional that took 8 months longer than promised and crashed during the first client demo. That's when I decided to build Phoenix myself. My time, my expertise, my equipment. Every ignored promotion became a new security module. Every time Preston announced Nate's got this handled instead of giving me proper recognition, I added another automated response protocol. Every Friday night, Austin left early for happy hour while I stayed late fixing his mistakes. I wrote cleaner code than he'd ever seen. I wasn't bitter anymore. Bitter people complain and hope things change. I was focused. Focused people build solutions. The breakthrough came in February. Tommy Walsh, CTO at SecureFlow Systems, reached out through LinkedIn. We'd met at the InfoSec conference in Vegas last year, talked about next-generation threat detection over bourbon at the hotel bar. "Hey Nathan," his message read, "hope you're doing well. We're implementing a new security operations platform and heard through the grapevine that you might have some interesting projects. Any chance you'd be open to discussing a small-scale pilot program? Nothing formal, just a 2-week technical evaluation. If it works, we'd want to talk licensing." Best, Tommy. I stared at that message for 20 minutes straight, heart hammering like I was back on deck during Stormwatch. See, here's the thing about building something on your own time. You never know if it's actually good or just feels good because it's yours. Tommy's message meant Phoenix might be more than weekend therapy. But first, I needed to check something important. I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I'd kept buried under old insurance documents and my son's college graduation photos. Inside was my original TechFlow employment contract from 2008. All 12 pages of legal language that nobody ever reads carefully, except I had read it multiple times. Page 4, Section 8.2, was highlighted in yellow marker. Employee retains full rights to intellectual property developed independently, using personal resources, outside of company time and facilities, like finding a hidden door in a locked prison cell. I printed that page, highlighted the clause again, and filed it in my desk drawer next to 15 years of performance reviews that praised my reliability while recommending I wait for the right opportunity for advancement. They didn't know about Phoenix, had no idea I'd been building an exit strategy in complete silence for 10 months, but they were about to find out. Time to test the waters. I started my strategic retreat the next Monday. No more staying until 8 p.m. to fix Austin's broken code. No more answering Slack messages at 11:30 p.m. because Preston had one quick security question. No more volunteering for weekend emergency patches when someone's nephew crashed the client portal. I became strategically boring. Left work exactly at 5 p.m. like it was military protocol. Stopped joining the after-hours brainstorming sessions that were really just Preston's excuse to dump more work on people without calling it overtime. "Nate seems burned out lately," I heard Linda from HR whisper to Preston outside the break room. "He used to be so committed to going above and beyond." Perfect. Let them think their reliable old Navy vet was coasting toward retirement. Every hour I stopped giving them, I invested in Phoenix. My evenings became sacred time. I'd pour 2 fingers of bourbon, boot up my personal laptop in the garage workshop, and work on something that actually mattered, something they couldn't steal credit for. Phoenix grew stronger every night. Real-time vulnerability scanning across multiple network architectures. Automated incident response that could isolate threats in under 30 seconds. Compliance reporting that made enterprise security teams look like they knew what they were doing instead of scrambling to meet audit deadlines. By Christmas, I had a working prototype that could outperform our entire department's quarterly output in a single week. Then Tommy Walsh's pilot program changed everything. I sent him a clean build with comprehensive documentation. Not some half-baked demo, but production-ready software with user guides, security protocols, and implementation timelines. 3 hours later, my phone rang. "Nathan, this is incredible." Tommy's voice had that edge of excitement you hear when someone finds exactly what they've been searching for. "My team ran preliminary tests this afternoon. Phoenix identified 12 vulnerabilities our current system missed completely. Can we schedule a formal evaluation? How formal are we talking?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. 2-week pilot program. Full integration with our client networks. If it performs like today's test run, we'll want to discuss licensing terms immediately. I agreed to the pilot, hung up, and sat in my garage for 20 minutes just breathing. This wasn't hobby coding anymore. This was a real business opportunity. But I knew what would happen the moment TechFlow caught wind of Phoenix. Preston would transform from budget constraints to, "We're launching this together," right? Faster than Austin could Google what is cybersecurity. So I prepared for war. March brought the Morrison defense contract, biggest deal in TechFlow's history. $8.7 million over 3 years to secure Department of Defense satellite communication networks. I'd spent 4 months writing the technical specifications, designed the entire authentication architecture, flew to Washington, D.C. twice on my own vacation days to walk their IT security team through implementation requirements. During the company-wide celebration meeting, Preston announced the win like he'd personally infiltrated the Pentagon. "I want to recognize the leadership team that made this happen," he said, leaning back in his chair like a general addressing troops. "Complex requirements, tight deadlines, but strategic planning pulled it together." Strategic planning. I wrote every page of the technical proposal, created the security framework from scratch, spent my own money on flights to meet with Defense Department officials. But when Preston said leadership team, everyone knew he meant Austin. And by strategic planning, he meant Austin had forwarded my emails to the client after changing the font to make them look more professional. Then came the punch to the gut. HR dropped into my Slack DMs like a bad punchline. "Hey Nate, heads up. We're bringing in Brooke Caldwell as junior security analyst. She'll be working closely with you on client implementations. Also, she's starting at $65,000. Just FYI, since you'll be training her." I stared at that message until the words blurred. $65,000 for Preston's 24-year-old daughter, fresh out of college with a communications degree and zero technical experience. She was making 46% of my $141,000 salary after I'd been there 15 years with Navy cryptography background and industry certifications. Brooke's biggest qualification was being Preston's kid and looking good in the corporate recruiting photos they posted on LinkedIn. I didn't respond to HR, just opened Phoenix and got back to work. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed with a text from Tommy Walsh. "Pilot program exceeded all expectations. Board met this morning and approved full implementation. We're ready to discuss licensing terms. This could be significant revenue, Nathan. Really significant. Significant." I sat back in my garage workshop chair looking at 10 months of code that could finally pay my son's medical school tuition without me taking out another loan. That evening, I made a tactical checklist. Not dreams or hopes, but concrete preparation. Verify all Phoenix backups on 3 separate external servers. Document complete development timeline with server timestamps. Schedule consultation with employment attorney about IP rights. Prepare public announcement strategy. Review contract. Section 8.2, one more time. The storm was coming. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but soon. Someone at TechFlow would figure out their dependable old veteran wasn't just fixing their problems anymore. I was building something better, and according to my contract, it belonged to me. The next morning, I made the announcement that would change everything. Simple LinkedIn post during my lunch break. Excited to announce the launch of Phoenix Security Platform. Grateful to our early beta clients who believed in the vision. Clean, professional. No mention of TechFlow or the 15 years they'd kept me in the basement while promoting their golf course connections. Within 2 hours, there were 94 comments. Industry veterans I'd known for years. CTOs asking about partnerships. Security researchers wanting technical demos. Then came the message I'd been expecting since the moment I hit post. "Preston, Nate, we need to talk. Urgent. Game on." Preston's follow-up messages came like machine gun fire. "Saw your LinkedIn post. You should have cleared this with leadership first. This creates serious IP concerns. Call me immediately. Nate, call me now." The tone shift was immediate, like a friendly neighbor suddenly discovering you'd built a fence on his property line, except this was my property, and I had the deed to prove it. I didn't call back, just silenced my phone and watched the notifications explode. By 3 p.m., I had inquiries from 2 more cybersecurity firms and a VC group that had completely ignored my cold emails 8 months ago. By 4 p.m., Preston was pacing outside my office like a caged animal, shooting glances through the glass partition every 30 seconds. By 5 p.m. sharp, I had an email that wasn't really a request. "Conference Room B, tomorrow 9 a.m. Bring all project documentation and development records. This is mandatory. Preston." No subject line, no please or thank you, just a corporate summons designed to intimidate. I printed out Section 8.2 one more time, highlighted it in bright yellow, and slipped it into a manila folder along with my Phoenix development logs, server timestamps, and backup documentation. Tomorrow, they'd try to claim Phoenix belonged to TechFlow, but I'd been preparing for this battle longer than they realized. Conference Room B felt like a tribunal when I walked in Tuesday morning. Preston sat at the head of the polished table, flanked by 2 board members I barely recognized. Some lawyer in a $2,000 suit who probably billed more per hour than most people made in a week. And there was Admiral Charles Morrison, retired Navy, current board advisor, the one person in that room who understood what honor and integrity actually meant. "Morning, Nate," Preston said, trying to sound casual but failing completely. "Thanks for joining us." I set my folder on the table and waited. Let them make the first move. "We were surprised by your announcement yesterday," Preston continued, dropping any pretense of friendliness. "It raised immediate concerns about intellectual property ownership and potential conflicts of interest." The room felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. I stayed quiet. "You developed this software while employed here," Preston said, his voice getting sharper. "Company policy is crystal clear. We own your innovations, period." The lawyer leaned forward like a shark who'd smelled blood in the water, started rattling off legal terminology about proprietary development, fiduciary obligations, and corporate intellectual property rights. Fancy words designed to make employees fold under pressure. I let him finish his entire speech. Every buzzword, every veiled threat, every attempt to make me believe I'd somehow broken rules I'd never agreed to follow. Then I opened my manila folder and slid Section 8.2 across that polished table like I was dealing cards. "This is my original employment contract from 2008, I said, voice steady as a compass needle. "Page 4, Section 8.2. Please read it carefully." The lawyer glanced down and started to continue his intimidation routine. "Read it out loud," I said again. Something in my tone made him actually look at the document this time. I watched his confident expression change like someone had pulled the power cord on his whole argument. "Employee retains full rights to intellectual property developed independently, using personal resources, outside of company time and facilities," he read slowly. Preston grabbed the contract like it might catch fire. "This isn't our standard language. Why is this clause still active?" "Because it's your signature on the bottom," I replied. "Same contract I've been renewing for 15 years. Same terms you approved every single year." The silence in that room was thick enough to cut with a blade. Board members stopped checking their phones. The lawyer was frantically flipping through pages like he might find a loophole hidden in the fine print. "You should have disclosed this project to management," Preston said, grasping for any leverage he could find. "I followed every single line of my contract," I replied calmly. "You just assumed I wouldn't read what I was signing." That's when Admiral Morrison spoke up. The man who'd been silent through the entire interrogation stood slowly from his chair, hands clasped behind his back like he was still commanding a destroyer. "You backed yourself into a corner, Preston," Morrison said quietly. His voice carried the kind of authority that comes from actually leading people through real crises. "This is how you treat 15 years of dedicated service? Drag a veteran into a conference room like he's committed corporate espionage?" Preston opened his mouth to argue, but Morrison wasn't finished. He followed his contract to the letter. "You signed that contract, he did the work on his own time with his own resources. You've ignored his value for years, denied him promotions he earned, and now you think you can claim ownership of his solution?" The Admiral turned toward me. "Nathan," I straightened up automatically. "Old habits from military service. You're dismissed. With our thanks for your dedicated service to this company." The other board members stood and walked out without a word. No discussion, no negotiation, just recognition of what was legally and morally right. Preston sat there looking like someone had pulled his spine out through his throat, still holding my contract like evidence that had convicted him instead of me. I gathered my folder, stood up slowly, and walked toward the door. "You know what the real tragedy is, Preston?" I said, pausing at the threshold. "You could have been part of Phoenix's success. All you had to do was treat me like my contributions mattered." Then I walked out of that conference room and into freedom for the first time in 15 years. My phone started buzzing before I reached the parking lot. First message was from my son at medical school. "Dad, saw your LinkedIn post. So proud of you. When do we celebrate?" I smiled for the first time in months. The real kind, not the corporate mask I'd been wearing for 15 years. Second buzz was Tommy Walsh, licensing agreement attached. Phoenix exceeded every benchmark we set. "Welcome to entrepreneurship, Nathan. This is going to be bigger than we discussed." I looked back at the TechFlow building one last time. Through the glass walls, I could see Preston still sitting in conference room B, probably wondering how his reliable old Navy veteran had just outmaneuvered his entire legal team with a contract clause they'd forgotten existed. Simple answer. I'd actually read what I signed, and I'd built something they couldn't steal. The licensing terms Tommy sent were more generous than I dared hope. Secure Flow Systems wanted exclusive rights for government contracts, plus revenue sharing on all enterprise implementations. The upfront payment alone would cover my son's remaining medical school tuition with enough left over to finally fix that vintage Harley in my garage. But Phoenix was just getting started. Over the next 2 weeks, word spread through the cybersecurity industry faster than malware on an unpatched network. Turns out, people had been watching my conference presentations for years, waiting to see what I'd build when I wasn't fixing other people's mistakes. CyberShield Technologies wanted licensing for healthcare implementations. Data Fortress Corp offered a partnership for financial services security. 3 different VC firms scheduled calls to discuss expansion funding. The best part? None of them cared that I was 52 years old. They cared that Phoenix worked better than anything else on the market. Meanwhile, TechFlow was imploding like a controlled demolition. My former colleague Lisa Rodriguez sent updates via text. Preston got called into executive leadership yesterday. Word is they're reviewing his entire management history. Then, Austin tried to claim he helped develop Phoenix. Admiral Morrison laughed him out of the boardroom. Then, they brought in outside consultants to assess our cybersecurity capabilities. Guess what they found? I didn't need to guess. Without me fixing everyone else's work, TechFlow's security infrastructure was exposed as the house of cards it had always been. The Morrison defense contract was already showing stress fractures because Austin couldn't implement the protocols I'd designed. 3 weeks after my departure, Preston was quietly reassigned to special projects, corporate speak for career limbo. Austin lost his senior product lead title when the Defense Department flagged multiple security vulnerabilities in his implementations. Brooke lasted exactly 6 weeks before quitting to pursue influencer opportunities on social media. But here's what I learned during those first months of freedom. Revenge isn't about watching your enemies fail. It's about building something so much better that their failures become irrelevant. By summer, Phoenix had 8 enterprise clients and 2 government contracts. I hired 3 former Navy cybersecurity specialists who were tired of corporate politics. We worked out of a converted warehouse space in Austin, Texas, where technical competence mattered more than office politics. My son finished his first year of medical school debt-free. We celebrated with a fishing trip to Lake Travis, just like when he was 12 years old and still thought his dad was the smartest person in the world. Turns out, maybe I was smarter than I'd given myself credit for. The real validation came 6 months later at the InfoSec conference in Las Vegas. I was keynoting the Cybersecurity Innovation panel when I spotted Preston in the audience, probably representing some new company that had hired him after TechFlow's restructuring. During the Q&A session, he stood up. "Nathan, impressive presentation," he said, his voice carrying across the auditorium. "I'm curious about Phoenix's development timeline. How long did this really take to build?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. 800 cybersecurity professionals waiting for my response. "Great question," I replied, looking directly at him. Phoenix took 10 months of focused development. Every line of code written during my personal time, using my own equipment, following the intellectual property guidelines in my employment contract. Pause. Let that sink in. Sometimes the best innovations come from people who've been underestimated for too long. People who understand that real security isn't about politics or favoritism. It's about building systems that actually work. The applause was immediate and sustained, standing ovation from an audience that knew exactly what I meant. Preston sat down without a follow-up question. After the panel, Admiral Morrison approached me backstage. He was attending as a board advisor for some defense contractors. "Outstanding presentation, Nathan," he said, offering his hand. "You've built something remarkable. The Navy could use more innovators like you." "Thank you, Admiral. That means more than you know." "One more thing," he said, lowering his voice. "Preston applied for a position with one of our contractors last month. I made sure they understood his management history. Some battles end with explosions. Others end with competence quietly defeating incompetence in the marketplace." I flew home to Austin that evening, looking down at the lights of Texas from 35,000 feet. My phone had 14 unread messages from potential clients, 3 interview requests from industry publications, and 1 text from my son. "Saw the conference live stream. Dad, you crushed it." At 52, I'd finally learned the most important lesson of my career. The system only controls you if you let it. I didn't let it. Phoenix was rising. And this time, I was the one flying. Thanks for following this journey. If it resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to bet on yourself. Your younger colleagues might not recognize your value, but the market will.